My name is Lacey, 30 years old, and until last month, I was the top-performing contracts specialist at TechVision Enterprises. When my boss Regina fired me after 7 years of dedicated service, she smugly told me I'd never work in tech again. What she didn't realize was that I'd inserted a crucial legal clause in our biggest pending acquisition that required my personal signature. Now I'm sitting across from her at the closing table for a $79 million deal, watching her world collapse. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from, and subscribe for more stories about workplace justice. I still remember my first day at TechVision Enterprises 7 years ago, fresh out of college with my business law degree, eager to prove myself in the corporate world. The office building seemed massive, then all glass and steel stretching toward the sky, and I felt so small walking through those revolving doors in my newly purchased suit from the clearance rack. "Welcome to TechVision," the receptionist had said with a warm smile. "Mr. Harrison is expecting you." William Harrison, the founder and CEO of TechVision, wasn't what I expected. Unlike the stern, intimidating figure I'd imagined, he was approachable and genuinely interested in nurturing new talent. During our first meeting, he spoke about his vision for the company, not just as a business but as an innovation hub that would transform the industry. "Lacey," he said, leaning forward in his chair, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Contracts aren't just paperwork, they're the architecture of business relationships. Get them right and everyone wins. Get them wrong and lawsuits happen," I finished for him, earning a hearty laugh. "Exactly, I need someone who understands that. Someone detail-oriented, but who also sees the bigger picture." That conversation set the tone for my career at TechVision. I started in an entry-level position, reviewing standard agreements and learning the ropes. But Mr. Harrison saw something in me. He began inviting me to sit in on negotiations, asking for my input on contract terms, mentoring me personally on the finer points of deal-making. By my third year, I had developed a reputation as the go-to person for contract expertise. Executives would seek my advice before signing major agreements. Vendors knew my name. And when complex deals came in, I was the one who structured the terms. Mr. Harrison and I developed a close professional relationship. We'd often stay late discussing strategy, and he began to trust me with increasingly sensitive company information. "You have good instincts, Lacey," he would say. "Trust them." Everything changed 2 years ago when Regina Parker joined as the new VP of Operations. From day one, something felt off about Regina. She arrived with an impressive resume and references, bringing a slick, corporate polish that contrasted sharply with Mr. Harrison's more straightforward approach. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, Regina quickly established herself as a force within the company. Our first meeting was brief. She shook my hand, firmly assessed me with a quick glance, and moved on to more pressing matters. I thought nothing of it then. Executives are busy people after all. But within weeks, I noticed a pattern. Regina began excluding me from meetings I'd previously been essential to. When I would offer input on contracts, she would cut me off with, "Let's stick to the agenda, shall we?" She brought in her own team people she'd worked with at previous companies and positioned them in key roles throughout the organization. The first time I was completely sidelined was during the Johnson account renewal. I had handled this client for years, knew all their concerns and preferences, but suddenly, Regina assigned it to Marcus Foster, her former colleague who had just joined the company. "Marcus has more experience with clients of this caliber," she explained when I questioned the decision. The dismissive tone in her voice made it clear this wasn't a discussion. What truly bothered me wasn't being passed over for the assignment. It was what happened after. The Johnson contract renewal went poorly. Terms were missed, concessions were made that didn't need to be, and the client was noticeably less satisfied. Yet when the post-mortem meeting happened, Regina praised Marcus for salvaging a difficult situation. I began paying closer attention to Regina's movements within the company. She was systematically repositioning herself closer to power, aligning with board members, entertaining key stakeholders, all while distancing Mr. Harrison from the day-to-day operations. Politics, my colleague Stephanie warned one day over lunch. "Regina's playing the long game. She did the same thing at Westlake Technologies before coming here." The Soft Matrix acquisition was the biggest deal in TechVision's history, a $79 million purchase that would transform our company's market position and technology portfolio. As the senior contract specialist, I naturally took the lead on structuring the agreement. Weeks of negotiations, legal reviews, and planning went into that deal. I worked directly with Mr. Harrison, crafting terms that would protect TechVision while ensuring a smooth transition. It was during one of our late-night strategy sessions that we discussed Regina's increasingly concerning behavior. "I've noticed," Mr. Harrison admitted, rubbing his tired eyes, "but the board loves her results. Just keep an eye on things for me, Lacey." That night, with his implicit approval, I added a special clause to the Soft Matrix acquisition agreement. Section 8.4, buried among standard legal language, required the signature of the designated assignee for final approval of the deal, and that assignee, me, Lacey Allen, named specifically in the document. Mr. Harrison reviewed the addition, raised an eyebrow, then nodded slowly. "Insurance policy," he murmured. "Smart." Neither of us could have predicted how crucial that clause would become. The change in the office atmosphere was gradual but unmistakable. Regina's influence grew week by week, and with it came a new corporate culture that felt foreign to the tech vision I knew and loved. Gone were the collaborative meetings and open discussions. In their place, rigid hierarchies and information silos. Regina's management style with me became increasingly hostile. What started as occasional critiques evolved into constant micromanagement. Documents I had prepared were returned covered in unnecessary revisions. Emails I sent were picked apart for imagined errors. Every decision required her approval, which often came with significant delays, putting me behind schedule through no fault of my own. "The formatting on this contract is inconsistent," she commented during one particularly frustrating review session. "And these terms aren't aligned with our new corporate direction." "What new direction?" I asked. "This follows the exact template we've always used for vendor agreements." Regina's smile was cold. "Perhaps you should pay more attention in leadership meetings." "Oh, wait. You're not invited to those anymore, are you?" I maintained my professionalism despite the growing tension. Documents were revised per her specifications. Criticism was accepted without argument. I worked longer hours to accommodate her last-minute requests and changing priorities. My hope was that competence and results would eventually speak for themselves. Then came the Nielsen presentation. I had spent weeks preparing for this meeting with potential investors, analyzing 5 years of contract data to show how our vendor relationships had improved efficiency and reduced costs. The morning of the presentation, Regina asked to review my slides. When the meeting began, Regina stood at the front of the room. As my team and I have discovered, she began clicking through my slides. With my name now removed, our contract management strategy has yielded significant improvements. My work, my analysis, my conclusions, all presented as hers. I sat in stunned silence as executives nodded approvingly, as potential investors took notes, as Regina accepted compliments for insights she had contributed nothing to. After the meeting, I waited until the room cleared and approached her. "That was my presentation," I said quietly, careful to ensure no one else could hear. "I spent weeks on that analysis." Regina barely looked up from gathering her materials, and it was presented to the right audience through the proper channels. "That's how business works, Lacey. Get used to it or get out." She brushed past me, adding, "You should be grateful your work is being used at all." That evening, I met Stephanie for drinks at a small bar far enough from the office to avoid running into coworkers. Over gin and tonics, I recounted what had happened. Classic Regina, Stephanie sighed, stirring her drink. "She did the same thing to Jordan in marketing last month. And before you, there was a whole team at her last company that got pushed out." "Pushed out." Stephanie leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Regina has a pattern. She joins a company, identifies the talented people, takes credit for their work while isolating them, then replaces them with her own people once she's established herself with leadership." "But surely Mr. Harrison sees through this," I protested. "Does he? When was the last time you had a real conversation with him? Regina's been running interference, controlling who gets access to him." Stephanie was right. My once regular meetings with Mr. Harrison had dwindled, then disappeared entirely. My emails to him now received brief replies that didn't sound like him at all, or more often responses from his assistant saying he was too busy. I tried scheduling time with him directly only to have the appointments rescheduled, then canceled. The mentor who had once made time for me regardless of his schedule was suddenly inaccessible behind layers of administrative barriers. The final blow came during a company-wide meeting announcing a restructuring. Regina stood beside Mr. Harrison, who looked uncharacteristically subdued as she outlined the new organizational chart. My department, which had previously reported directly to the chief legal officer, would now report to Regina's expanded operations division. This alignment creates greater efficiency, Regina explained, her eyes finding mine in the audience for just a moment, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. All contract processes will now be streamlined under unified leadership. As people filed out after the announcement, I overheard two of Regina's recent hires talking. Perfect timing, one said to the other. Right before the soft matrix deal closes. The restructuring wasn't just a power move. It was calculated timing. Regina had positioned herself to control the biggest acquisition in company history, and with it, to cement her position at TechVision permanently. The weeks following the restructuring announcement brought swift and dramatic changes. My role in the soft matrix acquisition negotiations, once central, became increasingly peripheral. Meetings occurred without my knowledge. Decisions were made without my input. Documents I had drafted were modified without consultation. The first time I was excluded from a major negotiation session, I told myself it was an oversight. By the third time, the pattern was undeniable. Regina was systematically removing me from the process I had helped initiate. One Tuesday morning, I arrived early to prepare for what I thought was a scheduled call with Soft Matrix's legal team. The conference room was dark, the call dial-in information nowhere to be found. Oh, that meeting was moved up. Regina's assistant informed me with rehearsed casualness. It happened yesterday afternoon instead. Regina didn't think your presence was necessary since Marcus is handling the contract details now. Marcus Foster. Regina's former colleague who had bungled the Johnson renewal was now apparently leading our most significant acquisition. The same Marcus who had been with the company for less than 6 months and had demonstrated no particular expertise in merger documentation. I retreated to my office trying to make sense of the situation when my desk phone rang. It was Stephanie. Conference room C. Right now, she whispered urgently. Doors ajar. Regina and Marcus are in there. Moving with deliberate casualness, I walked to the rarely used small conference room, tucked away in a quiet corner of the office. As I approached, voices carried through the partially open door. Once this deal closes, we can really start transforming this place. Regina was saying, her voice animated in a way I rarely heard in larger meetings. The board will be too busy counting their money to notice the operational changes we implement. What about Harrison? Marcus asked. William's influence is waning. This company has outgrown his small-time management style. The board sees it too, they just need a push. After the acquisition, we'll suggest he take on a chairman emeritus role. Ceremonial, no real power. And the contracts team, Alan's been there forever. Regina's laugh was cold. Lacey, please. She's a glorified paper pusher who got too comfortable because Harrison had a soft spot for her. Once you're officially heading legal operations, you can reorganize however you see fit. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just office politics. This was a calculated takeover with Mr. Harrison's removal as the ultimate goal. I backed away silently, retreating to the safety of my office where I could process what I'd heard. My hands shook as I pulled up the latest version of the Soft Matrix acquisition documents. As the company's contract specialist, I still had access to the shared drive even if I wasn't invited to the meetings. What I found confirmed my worst fears. The terms had changed significantly from my original draft. The careful protections I had built in for TechVision were weakened or removed entirely. New clauses created enormous financial incentives for key leadership during the transition period, with Regina's role specifically named. Most concerning were the modifications to the employee retention terms. My version had guaranteed positions for at least 18 months for all current staff. The new version contained vague language about organizational efficiency and redundancy assessments that effectively permitted mass layoffs immediately after closing. This wasn't just about Regina taking credit for my work anymore. She was restructuring the entire deal to benefit herself at the company's expense. And she was setting up the conditions to push out both Mr. Harrison and anyone loyal to him once the acquisition was complete. I drafted a careful email outlining the concerning changes, documenting the increased risks and questionable incentive structures. I sent it to the chief financial officer, the general counsel, and 2 board members I had worked with previously. For good measure, I copied Mr. Harrison, directly bypassing his assistant. Days passed with no response. The following week, I discovered my email had been marked as addressed in the company tracking system with a note: concerns reviewed by VP of Operations and deemed non-substantive. No action required. Regina had intercepted my warnings and dismissed them without anyone else's involvement. Meanwhile, my workload shifted dramatically. Instead of handling key client agreements and strategic partnerships, I was assigned to reviewing standard vendor contracts and updating template documents. Basic work that could have been handled by a first-year associate. We need to leverage your detail orientation where it adds most value, Regina explained during a brief department meeting, her tone suggesting she was doing me a favor. I did the work assigned, but in parallel I began my own project. Nights and weekends I meticulously documented every change to the soft matrix agreement, every procedural irregularity, every instance where standard protocols were bypassed. I created a comprehensive file showing how the original deal had transformed into something that prioritized short-term executive bonuses over long-term company health. As the acquisition closing date approached, tension in the office became palpable. The deal that should have been celebrated as a company triumph instead created an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear as rumors of post-merger reorganization spread. Then, 3 weeks before the scheduled closing, Mr. Harrison took an unexpected medical leave. The official announcement cited exhaustion and doctor's orders for rest, but the timing seemed suspiciously convenient for Regina's plans. With the company founder temporarily out of the picture, the last significant obstacle to her control was removed. I tried calling Mr. Harrison's home number, but it went straight to voicemail. My messages went unreturned. Whatever was happening with his health, he was completely cut off from company operations, and by extension from me. The soft matrix acquisition was now entirely in Regina's hands, with Marcus as her lieutenant. My special clause in Section 8.4 remained in the document, seemingly overlooked in their revisions, but without access to the closing process, I had no way to enforce it. I was running out of time and options as the calendar moved inexorably toward the acquisition date, and Regina moved closer to her ultimate goal of company control. The morning it all came to a head started like any other. I arrived at the office early, as had become my habit, to avoid unnecessary interactions with Regina or her growing circle of allies. The office was quiet, just the soft hum of the HVAC system and the distant sound of the cleaning crew finishing their rounds. I had spent the previous night finalizing my documentation of all the problematic changes to the soft matrix deal. The file was comprehensive screenshots, comparison documents, financial analyses, and a detailed timeline of how the acquisition had transformed from a strategic growth opportunity into what appeared to be a vehicle for executive enrichment and corporate restructuring. It wasn't just about protecting my job anymore. It was about protecting Tech Vision itself, the company Mr. Harrison had built, and that I had given 7 years of my professional life to. After reviewing the evidence one final time, I made the decision. I would confront Regina, directly present the findings professionally, and appeal to whatever corporate responsibility might remain in her. If that failed, I would escalate to the board with my complete documentation. At 9:30, I requested a meeting with Regina. To my surprise, her assistant scheduled it immediately for 11 o'clock. Perhaps Regina thought I was finally accepting defeat, coming to negotiate some kind of exit package. I spent the intervening time organizing my presentation, making sure every claim was backed by concrete evidence. When 11 o'clock arrived, I walked to Regina's office with my laptop and a folder of key documents, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Regina's corner office was a stark contrast to the rest of Tech Vision spaces. Where Mr. Harrison had preferred warm woods and comfortable furnishings, Regina had redecorated with chrome glass and minimalist white furniture. It was cold, sterile, and intimidating by design. "Lacey," she greeted me without looking up from her computer. "Make it quick. The soft matrix team is expecting my call at 11:30. I placed my folder on her desk and opened my laptop, I need to discuss some serious concerns about the acquisition terms, Regina. There have been significant changes that expose the company to unnecessary risk. This got her attention. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with narrowed eyes. Concerns? You're not even on the acquisition team anymore. I'm still the senior contracts specialist, and I have access to the documents, I replied, keeping my voice steady. The current terms have removed critical protections for TechVision. The employee retention guarantees are gone. The technological asset valuation method has changed in Softmatrix's favor, and the executive compensation package has tripled from the original terms. I turned my laptop to show her a side-by-side comparison of the original and current terms. Regina barely glanced at it. "Who do you think you are?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You're questioning decisions made by executive leadership and approved by legal." "Approved by Marcus, you mean?" "Who has been with the company less than 6 months and reports directly to you," I countered. "These changes weren't presented to the full board. They weren't reviewed by independent counsel." Regina stood abruptly, her chair rolling back to hit the wall behind her. "You are so far out of your lane, it's almost comical. This is exactly why you've been sidelined, Lacey. You're a replaceable contracts administrator who somehow thinks she's qualified to question business strategy." "This isn't about strategy," I insisted, pulling out the financial analysis. "These changes benefit a small group of executives at the expense of the company and its employees. Look at the numbers. The restructured deal will cost TechVision millions more while weakening our position after acquisition." Regina's face flushed with anger. "You think you understand this business because Harrison held your hand for a few years. You're just a paper pusher. A glorified secretary who got too comfortable." I pressed on, determined to make my case. "Regina, if this goes through as written, there will be consequences. Mass layoffs, technology asset devaluation, possible shareholder lawsuits when the true terms become public." "Enough." She slammed her hand on the desk. "You know what your problem is, Lacey. You never understood how things really work. Success isn't about dotting I's and crossing T's on contracts. It's about positioning power and knowing which relationships matter." She walked around the desk until she was standing directly in front of me. "You think anyone's going to listen to your concerns? I've spent the last 2 years making sure they won't. The board trusts me. The executive team reports to me. Even your precious Mr. Harrison has been sidelined." "This isn't right," I said, quietly standing my ground despite her proximity. "This company deserves better." Regina laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Right. This is business, not a morality play. TechVision will be stronger under proper leadership, not stuck in Harrison's outdated management style, with his loyal little helpers enabling his complacency." She returned to her seat, composed herself, and looked at me with cold finality. "You're fired effective immediately. Human resources will process your termination. Security will escort you to clear your desk." The words hit like a physical blow, but I wasn't entirely surprised. "On what grounds?" "Insubordination, overstepping your role, accessing confidential documents without authorization. Take your pick." She picked up her phone. "Security to my office, please." As I gathered my laptop and documents, Regina delivered her parting shot. "You'll never work in this industry again, Lacey. I'll make sure of it. Your career in tech is over." 2 security guards appeared at the door with embarrassing promptness. They had clearly been briefed and waiting nearby. Regina must have anticipated how our meeting would end before it even began. "Please escort Miss Allen to her desk to collect personal items, then out of the building," Regina instructed them as if I were a potential threat rather than a 7-year employee. Her access credentials should already be deactivated. The walk through the open office was excruciating. Colleagues looked up from their desks, conversations halted mid-sentence, and all eyes followed my humiliating procession with security flanking me on either side. Some looked away in secondhand embarrassment. Others watched with undisguised curiosity. At my desk, a HR representative was already waiting with a small cardboard box. "Personal items only," she reminded me, her voice professionally detached. "Company property including files and documents must remain." With trembling hands, I placed my family photos, desk plant, and a few personal items into the box. 7 years, reduced to a container I could carry in one arm. My computer had already been locked out the screen, displaying only the login page that would no longer accept my credentials. Stephanie approached, despite the HR rep's disapproving look. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, helping me pack the last few items. As she handed me my coffee mug, she slipped a small note into my palm. "Call me," she murmured before stepping away. The final walk to the elevator, through the lobby, and out those same revolving doors I had entered so hopefully 7 years ago was a blur. Security stayed with me until I reached the public sidewalk, where they gave a curt nod before retreating back into the building. I stood there, box in arms, as the full weight of what had just happened crashed down on me. Fired. Career threatened. Reputation at risk. And worst of all, unable to prevent what I knew was a disastrous deal for the company I still cared about despite everything. In my apartment that evening, surrounded by the pathetic contents of my desk box, I finally unfolded Stephanie's note. It contained just 10 words and a phone number. "Mr. Harrison wants to talk to you. Call this number." As I reached for my phone, it rang in my hand, displaying an unfamiliar number. With a deep breath, I answered. "Lacey." The voice was instantly recognizable, despite sounding weaker than I remembered. "It's William Harrison. I heard what happened today." "Mr. Harrison," I replied, my voice breaking slightly. I tried to stop it. The deal, the changes, everything Regina's been doing. "I know," he said gently. "And now we need to talk. Remember that clause we added, Section 8.4. It's time to use it." For the first time since security had marched me out of the building, I felt a flicker of hope. Mr. Harrison's house was nothing like I expected. For a tech company founder worth millions, his home was surprisingly modest, a craftsman-style house on a quiet street distinguished only by its meticulously maintained garden. When I arrived the following morning, he answered the door himself, despite his apparent frailty. "The medical leave is only partially exaggerated," he explained as he led me to his study. "Stress-induced heart issues. Doctors want me taking it easy for a few weeks." He gestured to an array of pill bottles on a side table. "But my mind is clear, and we have work to do." The study was warm and inviting, walls lined with books and framed photographs, chronicling TechVision's growth from startup to industry player. It struck me that while Regina had been erasing the company's history and culture, Mr. Harrison had been preserving it here in his home. "Regina's been planning this for longer than we realized." He began, lowering himself carefully into a leather armchair. "The board brought her in specifically to modernize operations, which I supported. Every company needs fresh perspective. What I didn't anticipate was her systematic campaign to consolidate power." He picked up a folder from his desk and handed it to me. Inside were emails, meeting minutes, and financial projections I'd never seen before. "She's been feeding the board selective information for months," he continued, "emphasizing short-term metrics, where she excels, downplaying long-term investments that were my priority. The Soft Matrix acquisition was my initiative, but she's repositioned it as her strategic vision. She told me I'd never work in tech again," I said quietly, still processing the documents in front of me. Mr. Harrison laughed softly. "Regina overestimates her influence. She's burned too many bridges in this industry to have that kind of power." His expression grew serious. "But she does have enough influence to damage TechVision if this acquisition proceeds on her terms." For the next 2 hours, we dissected Regina's strategy and the current state of the Soft Matrix deal. Mr. Harrison had received copies of the modified terms through his own channels and confirmed my assessment. The changes substantially benefited Regina and her allies while exposing the company to significant risk. "The closing meeting is scheduled for next Thursday," Mr. Harrison said, checking his calendar. "Regina's pushed to complete this quickly while I'm out, and before anyone can raise substantive objections." "But what can we do?" I asked. "I've been fired. You're on medical leave. Regina controls the process now." Mr. Harrison smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "That's where Section 8.4 comes in, the assignee clause." He pulled out the original acquisition agreement and turned to the section we had added months ago. There it was in standard legal language that most people would skim over. Final execution of this agreement requires the signature of the designated assignee Lacey Allen as representative of TechVision's contractual interests. She never removed it. I realized scanning the most recent version Mr. Harrison had obtained. In all the revisions and changes, this clause is still intact. Regina's legal background is in operations, not contracts, Mr. Harrison explained. And Marcus isn't thorough enough to catch something this specific. They probably assumed it was standard language with my name that would transfer automatically to Regina as acting CEO. But is it enforceable, I asked? I'm not an employee anymore. That's what we need to verify, Mr. Harrison said. I've arranged for you to meet with Patricia Chen this afternoon. She's an attorney friend who specializes in corporate law, completely independent from TechVision and anyone Regina might influence. Patricia Chen's downtown law office projected competence and discretion. Paintings of peaceful landscapes adorned walls painted in muted blues and grays. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct, and assessing as she invited me to sit. William explained the situation. She began jumping straight to business. I've reviewed the documents he provided. Now I need to hear your version of events. I recounted everything: my history at TechVision, Regina's arrival and systematic campaign against me, the changes to the acquisition terms, my confrontation with her, and the firing. Patricia took minimal notes, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly listening intently. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. From a legal standpoint, your position is stronger than you might think. The assignee clause is unambiguous and properly executed in the original agreement. Your termination doesn't invalidate it because the clause names you personally, not your position. So I still have the right to approve or reject the final agreement, I asked. Yes, but executing this requires careful handling, Patricia cautioned. If you simply refuse to sign, Regina could potentially argue force majeure or seek an emergency injunction to proceed without your signature, especially if she can convince a judge that you're acting out of personal vindictiveness. I'm not, I insisted. The revised terms are genuinely bad for TechVision. Which is exactly what we need to focus on, Patricia agreed. Your leverage isn't just the legal right to withhold your signature. It's your detailed knowledge of how the deal has been compromised and the documentation to prove it. We spent the next several hours developing a strategy. Patricia helped me organize my evidence into a clear, compelling narrative that focused on the business implications rather than personal conflicts. We prepared talking points that emphasized my commitment to TechVision's long-term interests rather than opposition to Regina personally. The key, Patricia explained, is positioning yourself as the adult in the room. Not emotional, not vindictive, just professionally concerned with protecting the company's interests. When I left Patricia's office, I had a clear action plan and renewed confidence. I called Stephanie that evening to gather intelligence about the closing meeting details. It's scheduled for Thursday at 10, in the main conference room, she confirmed. Softmatrix is sending their CEO, CFO, and legal team. Regina's been rehearsing her closing speech all week. Has she mentioned Section 8.4 or the assignee requirement, I asked. Not that I've heard, Stephanie replied. She seems completely focused on impressing the Softmatrix executives and the board members who'll be attending. The night before the confrontation, I barely slept. I reviewed my documentation one final time, rehearsed what I would say, and even laid out my most professional outfit. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just my professional reputation, but the future of TechVision itself. As dawn broke, I received a text message from Mr. Harrison. Remember who you're fighting for. Not against Regina, but for the company and people we care about. You're ready for this. With those words in mind, I prepared to face Regina one last time, not as a defeated former employee, but as the one person who could stop her plans in their tracks. The morning of the closing meeting dawned bright and clear. I dressed with deliberate care. A charcoal gray suit, crisp white blouse, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a neat bun. Professional, understated, confident. I wanted to project authority without appearing to try too hard to be taken seriously from the moment I entered the room. Patricia Chen had advised me on timing. Don't arrive early to mingle. Make an entrance when the meeting is just beginning. Maximum impact, minimum opportunity for Regina to regroup or have you removed before things officially start. I took a deep breath as I approached the TechVision building, the same one I'd been escorted from in humiliation just a week earlier. This time I walked through the revolving doors with purpose, my documentation in a sleek leather portfolio under my arm. The security guard at the reception desk frowned in confusion when I stated my business. "Miss Allen, you're not on my visitor list for today." "Check again," I suggested calmly. "I'm expected at the Soft Matrix closing meeting in the main conference room." As he began to protest, a familiar voice called from across the lobby. "She's with me." Stephanie hurried over, professionally dressed for the meeting and holding a visitor badge. "Last-minute addition," she explained to the guard with a winning smile. He shrugged and logged me in. As Stephanie handed me the badge, she whispered, "Everyone's already gathering. Regina's been networking with the Soft Matrix team since they arrived. She has no idea you're coming." We took the elevator to the executive floor in silence. I could feel my heart pounding but kept my breathing steady, mentally reviewing the key points I needed to make. When the doors opened, the sounds of pre-meeting small talk drifted down the corridor from the open conference room door. "Ready?" Stephanie asked cutely. I nodded. "Ready." The main conference room was TechVision's showcase space with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The long oval table was surrounded by executives in business attire, coffee cups and water bottles at their places, folders and tablets laid out in preparation. Regina stood at the head of the table, animatedly describing something to the silver-haired man beside her, presumably Soft Matrix's CEO. Marcus hovered nearby, nodding eagerly at whatever Regina was saying. My entrance wasn't immediately noticed, which gave me a moment to scan the room. Board members on one side, Soft Matrix executives on the other, various support staff and legal representatives filling the remaining seats. The atmosphere was congratulatory, as if the deal were already complete. It was one of the Soft Matrix lawyers who spotted me first, his brow furrowing in confusion at the unfamiliar face. He leaned over to whisper something to his colleague, whose head turned sharply in my direction. The ripple effect spread quickly around the table, until Regina, sensing the shift in attention, looked up. The flash of shock on her face was brief but unmistakable before she composed herself. "Lacey," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "This is a closed meeting for authorized personnel only." I stepped further into the room, my posture straight, my voice clear and controlled. As the designated assignee referenced in Section 8.4 of the acquisition agreement, I believe I am required to be here. Regina's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "Miss Allen is no longer with TechVision," she announced to the room. "Security will escort her out momentarily." She made a subtle gesture toward the door where a security guard had appeared. Before anyone could move, one of the Soft Matrix attorneys spoke up. "Section 8.4. I don't recall that provision specifically. Could someone clarify?" Marcus quickly flipped through his copy of the agreement. "It's a standard execution clause," he began, but the attorney had already found the section in his own document. "This states that final execution requires signature from the designated assignee, specifically naming Lacey Allen," the attorney read, looking up with professional interest. "Is there a reason this individual's specific approval was included?" Regina attempted to regain control. "It's an outdated clause from an early draft. Miss Allen was previously involved in contract administration but is no longer affiliated with TechVision. Her signature is not required for valid execution." "Actually," the attorney replied, his tone neutral but firm, "the language is quite clear. This wasn't flagged during our legal review as a provision subject to change or removal. It appears to be a binding condition of the agreement as written." Regina laughed dismissively, waving a hand as if shooing away an annoyance. "This is a minor administrative detail that can be easily amended. Miss Allen's former role has been absorbed by our current legal operations team." She gestured toward Marcus. "She's just a footnote in this company's history, not a critical signatory." The Soft Matrix CEO, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. "In a $79 million acquisition, there are no minor details, Miss Parker. If your team overlooked something this significant in the agreement, what else might have been missed?" He turned to his attorney. "Allen, what's the implication here?" The attorney, Allen, studied the document again. "The clause is unambiguous. Without the assignee's signature, the agreement cannot be properly executed." He looked directly at me. May I ask who exactly is the assignee referenced in this section? The room fell completely silent. All eyes turned to me as I raised my hand slightly. That would be me. Regina's attempt at bravado visibly crumbled. Her face paled as she looked from me to the attorney, suddenly understanding the full implications of what was happening. Alan leaned over to whisper something to the soft matrix CEO, who nodded gravely. Then the attorney looked directly at Regina and said just loudly enough for nearby people to hear, "Oh, you are so screwed." Regina recovered quickly, her voice taking on a sharp edge. This is clearly an attempt at sabotage by a disgruntled former employee. We can proceed without this unnecessary signature. Legally, you cannot, I stated calmly, opening my portfolio. And there are other aspects of this agreement that require immediate attention before any signing occurs. This is absurd, Regina snapped. Security, please remove Miss Allen from the premises. I wouldn't do that, came a new voice from the doorway. Mr. Harrison walked into the room looking tired but determined. Though dressed more casually than the executives present, his authority was unmistakable. Not unless you want to explain to our friends from Soft Matrix why you're forcibly removing a legally designated signatory from a closing meeting. The security guard looked from Regina to Mr. Harrison, clearly uncertain whose orders to follow. Mr. Harrison solved his dilemma by addressing the room at large. As founder and substantial shareholder of TechVision, I apologize for this confusion. I'd like to suggest we take a 30-minute recess to sort this out properly. The Soft Matrix CEO nodded. I think that would be wise. As the visitors filed out for the break, Regina cornered Mr. Harrison and me in a heated whisper. What the hell do you think you're doing? This deal is critical to the company. I agree, I replied, maintaining my composure. Which is why the board and our partners deserve to know how the terms have changed since the initial agreement. With precise professional detachment, I presented the documentation I had prepared, side-by-side comparisons of original versus current terms. Financial analyses showing the shifting benefits from the company to select executives, the weakened protections for employees, and intellectual property. The original deal structure provided balanced benefits to both companies and protected TechVision's long-term interests, I explained to the board members who had gathered around. The current version significantly favors short-term executive compensation over company value and sustainability. Regina attempted to interrupt several times, but the board chairman held up his hand to silence her. Let's hear Miss Allen out completely before responding. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through each problematic change, careful to focus on business implications rather than personal accusations. Regina's face grew increasingly flushed as board members began asking pointed questions about decisions she had represented as unanimous executive approvals. When the Soft Matrix team returned, their demeanor had noticeably shifted. The CEO took his seat with a grave expression. In light of these revelations, we need to reconsider certain aspects of this agreement. We entered these negotiations in good faith, expecting the same from TechVision. Absolutely, the board chairman agreed. I believe we need to adjourn this closing meeting and reconvene after a thorough review of the original terms compared to the current document. Regina made one last desperate attempt. Delays could jeopardize the entire acquisition. The market won't react well to postponement. The market would react far worse to a hasty deal that leads to shareholder lawsuits, Mr. Harrison countered. Which is exactly what could happen if these revised terms were executed as they stand. The meeting ended without the deal closing. As people gathered their materials and began to leave, Regina remained seated, staring at the documents spread before her, her carefully constructed plan in ruins. I caught her eye as I collected my portfolio. She didn't speak, but her expression conveyed everything: shock, fury, and the dawning realization that her position at TechVision had just become extremely precarious. Mr. Harrison placed a hand on my shoulder as we walked out. Well done, he said simply. The real work begins tomorrow. As we left the conference room, I glanced back one last time. Regina sat alone at the massive table surrounded by empty chairs, her empire crumbling before it could even be built. The aftermath of the failed closing meeting unfolded with surprising speed. By that afternoon, Regina had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into the acquisition terms and her management practices. Marcus, too, was suspended, his access to company systems immediately revoked. The board called an emergency session that stretched late into the evening. Though I wasn't present, Mr. Harrison kept me updated through periodic text messages. Board in shock over extent of changes. CFO confirming your financial analysis was accurate. Independent counsel being brought in to review all recent executive decisions. The following morning, I received a formal email from the board chairman requesting a meeting. Despite my vindication at the closing table, nervousness fluttered in my stomach as I entered the executive floor once again. So much remained uncertain, including my own professional future. The chairman greeted me with unexpected warmth, rising from behind his desk to shake my hand. "Miss Allen, please sit down. We have much to discuss." For the next hour, I answered questions about my time at TechVision, the changes I had observed under Regina's leadership, and the documentation I had compiled. I spoke honestly but took care not to appear vindictive, focusing on my concern for the company rather than personal grievances. "Your actions saved TechVision from a potentially disastrous arrangement," the chairman concluded. "The board has unanimously agreed that your termination was unwarranted and improper." He slid a document across the desk. "This is a formal offer of reinstatement with a promotion to Director of Contract Governance and Compliance, reporting directly to the board. The position includes a substantial increase in compensation and a special recognition bonus for your service to the company." I stared at the offer letter, emotions welling up that I had kept carefully contained throughout the ordeal. "Thank you," I managed. "I'm grateful for the recognition." "There's more," he continued. "We'd like you to lead the team renegotiating the soft matrix terms. Your understanding of the original intent and the problematic revisions makes you uniquely qualified. Mr. Harrison will provide guidance, but this would be your project to manage." Within a week, I was back at TechVision with a new office, expanded responsibilities, and the respective colleagues who had witnessed my stand against corruption. The official company announcement described my return as part of a recommitment to TechVision's founding values of integrity and innovation. Regina's fate was sealed by the investigation. Email records, meeting minutes, and testimony from staff revealed a pattern of manipulation and self-dealing that extended well beyond the soft matrix acquisition. 2 weeks after the failed closing, she was formally terminated for cause, with the board publicly citing breaches of fiduciary duty and conduct inconsistent with company values. The technology press covered the story extensively, though without all the personal details I knew firsthand. Industry analysts noted that TechVision had narrowly avoided a corporate governance disaster through exceptional internal controls. Those of us who knew the full story smiled at the sanitized version of events. With Regina gone and Mr. Harrison back in an active advisory role, we rebuilt the soft matrix deal from the ground up. The restructured acquisition, when finally completed 3 months later, saved TechVision over $7 million compared to Regina's version, while providing stronger protections for employees and intellectual property. Soft matrix executives, impressed by our commitment to a fair and transparent process, became strong allies rather than wary counterparties. Perhaps most satisfying was watching Regina's carefully cultivated industry reputation crumble. Her attempts to secure another executive position met with closed doors, as the circumstances of her departure from TechVision became known in professional circles. The power she had wielded so ruthlessly, and the influence she had threatened me with, proved ephemeral when exposed to the light of scrutiny. But as weeks turned to months, I found that dwelling on Regina's downfall brought diminishing satisfaction. The anger and hurt that had driven me initially began to fade, replaced by a focus on rebuilding and strengthening the company I had fought to protect. My new role allowed me to implement contract governance systems that would prevent similar manipulation in the future. I established review protocols that required multiple independent approvals for significant changes to major agreements. Transparency became my watchword, ensuring that no single executive could ever again operate in the shadows. The healing extended to personal relationships as well. Team members who had distanced themselves during Regina's reign cautiously returned to the collaborative culture that had originally defined TechVision. Stephanie was promoted to senior marketing strategist, her loyalty during the crisis recognized and rewarded. Most meaningful was the opportunity to mentor younger employees navigating the complex waters of corporate politics. Document everything, I advised a promising contract specialist. but also build relationships based on genuine value and integrity. Your reputation is built over years but can be tested in moments. 6 months after the confrontation, Mr. Harrison and I had dinner to celebrate the complete integration of Soft Matrix's technology into our product line. As we enjoyed dessert, he asked a question that gave me pause. Do you regret any of it, Lacey? The clause, the confrontation, all of it. I considered carefully before answering. I regret that it became necessary. I wish Regina had been the leader she presented herself as rather than the one she turned out to be. I took a sip of coffee. But I don't regret standing up for what was right, even when it cost me temporarily. He nodded thoughtfully. You know, the real victory wasn't stopping a bad deal. It was demonstrating that integrity can prevail in business without requiring you to become like those you're fighting against. That insight crystallized what I had been feeling but couldn't articulate. My revenge against Regina hadn't been about destroying her but about preserving something valuable that she would have sacrificed for personal gain. The satisfaction came not from her downfall but from the company's renewal. The experience transformed my professional identity in unexpected ways. The fear and insecurity that had initially plagued me after being fired gave way to a quiet confidence that no title or position could provide. I had faced the worst-case scenario professionally and not only survived but emerged stronger. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that moving forward didn't require holding on to anger. Regina had been a challenging chapter in my story, not the defining one. The energy once devoted to documenting her misdeeds was now channeled into innovation and mentorship, creating rather than merely defending. Looking back now, I recognize that true success isn't measured by triumphs over others, but by the integrity with which we navigate difficult situations. The corporate world can be ruthless, but that doesn't mean we must become ruthless to succeed within it. Have you ever stood up for what's right when it would have been easier to walk away, or face someone who abused their power and found a way to hold them accountable? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of corporate justice resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might need a reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win in the end. Thank you for listening, and remember, your integrity is always your most valuable professional asset.